Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Wyatt Claypool Show. Usually, provincial politics and federal politics calms down after an election. People realize they're going to have to live with the government for 4 years. That government slowly gets back to work, and you don't really hear that much kind of explosive, controversial stuff happening, at least for several months, when the government starts getting sort of the gears of legislation going again. But that is not the case in British Columbia. Everything is a complete disaster already after the last BC provincial election in October. And some of that disaster has to do with the last election. And to talk about it with me today and try and make some of what's going on make a little bit more sense is my friend Ryan Painter, who has a lot of in-house political experience, out-of-house political experience. You've been following it for a very long time. How's it going, Ryan?
It's going great. Thanks so much for having me here, Wyatt. I'm enjoying a nice, mostly restful Sunday here in just outside of the capital in View Royal. Most people don't know where that is, so I just say Victoria.
Yeah, it's somewhere on the island. I only know that there is BC, there's Vancouver, there's things outside of Vancouver, and then there's things on the island, and then there's Victoria. But
Yeah,
yeah, so I would recommend everyone go and check out Ryan Painter's Substack. I will be linking that in the description below because he does do some good detailed coverage of stuff that happens in BC politics and other interesting conversations with people I know and people I don't know. But let's start with what I think is going to flavor the entire conversation, which is the Surrey Guildford sort of election irregularities controversy that's going on. Because I didn't know this until right before the show, but you actually have some insight into what the controversy is on the ground. It's a riding where the BC NDP only got Gary Begg reelected by 22 votes. The BC Conservative candidate Hanvir Randawa has brought a lawsuit to the courts in order to basically nullify this election and hold a new by-election because of irregularities found. And you can give me some details on what you have seen with that, because I think this is important to sort of contextualize the behavior of why it seems like Eby and the BC NDP are so aggressive right now. They really do not want a new by-election happening.
yeah. It was interesting because I was involved in the election as I know you were. I was working up north, and you were doing all kinds of stuff down on the Lower Mainland, and there were concerns about ballot boxes and various different things like that going on, and I tend to be very I guess slow to look at things. Like, I'm very analytical. I try not to get too excited about stuff because when it comes to elections, I know people are people. Sometimes mistakes are made. It doesn't mean that there's corruption. It doesn't mean that there's problems or issues all the time. So I try to take a very methodical approach to concerns around elections, not least of which is it's become so de rigueur to call people election deniers that I would just like to stay away from that moniker as much as possible. But what happened here in Surrey Guildford was just so seemingly crazy that it just had to be pursued. So what you had was a care home for addictions and mental illness in Surrey Guildford, a place called Argyle Lodge. And essentially, it turned out that there were 21 people who voted in this one place. And the why that's weird is they had 21 mail-in ballots apparently sent to this place without anybody asking for them. And so anyone who knows, and I don't expect most of your listeners to know the Elections Act inside and out, but in order to get a mail-in ballot, you have to ask for one. It won't be sent to you otherwise. And what we found was that, no, in fact, these 21 ballots had arrived, had been there, that folks had filled them out and sent them in when the actual polling station was maybe 500 yards or something across the street.
Well,
Like, it was
wasn't
just
it?
across the street.
It was like Argyle Lodge, the
Yep,
sidewalk, the road, the other sidewalk, and then the walk up to the school where the polling
exactly.
station was.
Exactly. The polling station was right there. Now, we don't know where the doors were for the polling station, but at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter. The polling location wasn't so far away from Argyle Lodge that it made sense that for some reason, 21 mail-in ballots were there. Now, let's put that whole piece aside, because I actually think what is more important is that we've now had the manager of the Argyle Lodge say in public, well, for 30 years, we've been getting mail-in ballots delivered to us in bulk from the commission. She says the commission. She means Elections BC and ostensibly Elections Canada. But Elections BC has come out and refuted that and said, we don't do that. We don't deliver mail-in ballots in bulk to anybody. Individuals have to ask for them. And another side of this is only one person can vouch for another person if you're voting. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things mixed up in this, right? The concern is, how did all of these ballots get here? Who orchestrated all of this? And sworn affidavits were also brought forward where people said that they were coerced into filling out these ballots. They didn't know who they were voting for. They felt that they might get kicked out of the lodge if they didn't vote a certain way. Lots of concerns around just being forced to vote in a certain way, right? So,
And because it's a recovery lodge, it's not like, oh, well, I got kicked out, I'm standing up to this unprincipled manager and I'm going to go get a new place to rent. It's like, this might be literally the only place that would actually let you in because you've had to recover from addictions. You have maybe mental illness sort of issues because of that. And so, like, you're a textbook vulnerable person. And you're right. The thing, too, about the polling location being so close is I actually, at first, when I heard the story, assumed it was like a long-term care home for people in their 80s who have mobility issues. Like, no mobility issues that I know of. But one thing that was problematic that I heard, and this was part of the affidavits, was that there were issues, or wasn't part of an affidavit, it was technically just eyewitness because this person wouldn't have been able to sign an affidavit, that there was several nonverbal people who would have not been able to articulate a voting preference, or would have not been able to have, or would have not had the capacity to have engaged in the election in any way someone would actually see as legitimate. And so
that's right.
When the manager came out, and I'm not sure if you know this part, did you hear that she said, well, I spoiled my ballot in this election?
I didn't hear that. That's a new wrinkle that I haven't heard. And I don't think this is the last we've heard from her either, I have to say. I think we're going to hear more from her in the next couple weeks.
My thing is, like, that's a really cute lie in the sense that, yeah, really, are you one of 3 people who intentionally spoiled their ballots in this riding for the election? Yeah. Because obviously she's not going to say, oh, I voted conservative. Don't bark up this tree. Because her donation record of $1,400, i.e. maxed out donation to the BC NDP in 2023, makes it so that she can't say, well, I voted conservative. And so if she votes NDP, that's like obviously a problem if she's filling out other people's ballots and donating to them. So no, I spoiled my ballot.
It's another ripple. It's another ripple that just raises more questions than answers. So what Hanveer is doing is he's pursuing an independent review of this in court. He's submitted the filings that is ostensibly moving forward. We don't have any more news on that. But the party itself has also called for a police investigation. Now, given all this new news that we have about all these ballots that apparently arrived, the concerns from folks around, kind of harvesting, forcing, coercing, there's a lot of concerns about what's happened at this lodge, given the public statements from Baljit Kandola, who is the manager of the lodge. A lot of her public statements run contrary to the public statements of Elections BC, and our elections and our kind of democratic rights, they require this investigation. But the province, in terms of saying we need an independent investigation, which is what conservatives are certainly calling for, the province has said, no, we're going to do an all-party committee. We're going to have everybody sit down and talk this out. And the conservatives are saying, no, we need to take this out of the politicians' hands and make this an independent inquiry. But the
all-party committee that's being run by someone from the BC NDP.
Of course. The chair will be an NDPer, and the vice chair will probably be an NDPer as well. And they'll probably have 1 or 2, conservatives and maybe 1 green, and that'll be it, right? So
if we come into the ballpark of some interesting questions that need to be asked, I will assume that they will not let that go forward.
The committees are great because they're places where conversations can happen. You can tease out some issues, but they're not, in my opinion, places where you get good investigative work done.
Yeah, definitely. So the thing that's so funny about this was that David Eby himself was the man in November when we had a lot of these more, headline catching issues in the election come up. They weren't really affecting any important ridings. It was like a ballot box was found in a riding that wasn't counted, that the Conservatives won by like 5,000 votes.
It was in
And it
Prince
had
George
like,
Mackenzie. Yep.
yeah, it had a few hundred, it had like 500, 800 votes in it. That's a lot of votes, not in that riding in terms of the margin of victory. But that's when Eby felt comfortable to come out and say, yeah, we need, a commission to look into this. BC elections needs its procedures tightened up. We'll look into what we can do. But then when Rustad and Honveer come out and say, well, hey, look, Surrey Guildford, where your buddy only won by 22 votes, has at least 45 irregularities that we've been able to find on our own without any data that was useful to us from Elections BC. Maybe we should look into this. And then David Eby pivots into, well, you're a bunch of election deniers, sore losers, all this stuff. And why he's this concerned about the election is because if a by-election was held, I guarantee he loses. And he knows that he loses because so far, it wasn't even like a second almost in terms of political time. It wasn't even like a second after the election that things started popping loose and BC NDP promises did not come to fruition. Like a week after the election, wasn't it, that like 50% of ERs in the province, like a month or so after, had already had closure issues. The $1,000 grocery checks the BC NDP had promised during the campaign suddenly cannot be paid for anymore because the government's about to run a record deficit, aside from all those new spending promises, because the tax revenues from 2024 were not what they expected them to be. It came in way lower than expected. Who could have seen that coming, considering the fact that they have been basically killing private sector jobs all year long? Every time they posted, oh, well, we added 11,000 new jobs this month, you would look at it and they added like 20,000 public sector jobs. They lost 9,000 private sector jobs.
On this jobs piece, though, like the BC is leading nationally in the number of public sector jobs compared to private sector. It's like 6 to 7 public sector jobs to 1 private sector job. And I think in the most recent jobs report survey that I looked at, I think BC lost some. I'm gonna get the number wrong here.
It was 6,500 or so.
Yeah, it was like 6,500 jobs, that like private sector jobs that were lost in BC,
which pay for public sector positions. I never get when people don't understand this. There are great public sector positions we need filled that are very productive for the province. The police, firefighters, nurses, doctors, all those sort of things. People who work in government offices that are actually doing good work. But the thing is, every time a new person's added, there isn't like a paper that comes out justifying why we needed 2,000 more people in this department and why this department had needed 50 new office workers. It's just kind of taken as a net good that a bunch of people were hired to do stuff.
And in all of that, you've got the irony of all of this is you have the collapse and bankruptcy of Small Business BC, which was an organization essentially created through provincial and federal mandate to support small businesses. And who sat on the board of Small Business BC but a direct line to the Minister of Jobs? I think it was a deputy minister or something who sat there. And all of a sudden, and it came so fast after the election, just suddenly it's gone bankrupt. It had gotten an infusion of cash from the feds just before. And now not only has it gone bankrupt, there's concerns about whether or not people have been fully paid out for what they're earned. There's concerns that there's actually going to be more money that BC is going to have to pay out because they're bankrupt and they actually owe creditors. Like, it's a huge problem that we have not seen the last of yet.
Sounds like the BC United of government institutions. But like, and that's so pathetic because they probably knew it was going bankrupt probably 6 months ago, but it just got enough cash that they knew it would take them past October 19th. And that is blatant corruption in a lot of ways when you're running the government not for the actual purposes you're meant to achieve, not because small business BC is supposed to support small businesses. It is basically just trying to exist for 6 months to take them past the election. A lot of this stuff, just like the water treatment plant on the North Shore, was the project. And that this is literally probably, in terms of a macro project, no doubt there's been some small government contract for like $500 that ended up costing $10,000. and it's like crazy the overrun. But for like a macro infrastructure project, I don't think there has been a bigger cost overrun in Canadian history without
No.
like a justifiable like environmental crisis that happened, like an earthquake set work back. This is just mismanagement. The BC North Shore water treatment plant was supposed to cost $700 million, which is an absolutely realistic amount of money to spend on something like this. Unveil to the audience how much this is costing now while I take a sip of coffee out of grief.
So I'm not going to get the number right, but I think we're somewhere now at 5-6 billion, somewhere around there. My number may be off.
I've heard it is at least 4 billion now, but it's not even complete. So I think your 5 to 6 billion is what they're now projecting.
I think 5 to 6 billion is the projection of where we're going to wind up when it's all done. And look, I wouldn't be surprised if it went higher. I mean, here's the thing, Wyatt. Everything costs more now. Right? Everything costs more. Interests are up. Carpenters, contractors, construction workers, materials, everything costs more. Now, if it was just an increase that, as you say, you could justify based on labor and materials, totally fine. But the problem here had nothing to do with that. It was everything to do with mismanagement from Metro and between Acciona, the company that was hired to do this work. And my understanding, and this is going to blow your socks off, my understanding is that there may be a settlement between the two, and they may be looking to sign NDAs. And if that happens, oh my gosh, are we the public in trouble? Because we won't be able to get the information we need about what happened in all of this. I mean, we have little bits and pieces of information, and some material was purchased that wasn't quite right, and they had to go. It's almost like a Blue Bridge scenario for anyone from Victoria who understands the issue of Chinese steel that was brought in to remake the Johnson Street Bridge. And it sounds like there were some issues there with this. But if they sign NDAs, they can hide behind that, and we don't get any information. So we need a full public inquiry and an audit from the Inspector General of Municipalities to really get to the bottom of this and understand what went wrong and who screwed up, because it's a lot of money.
And I have no doubt that when this kind of like truly hits the fan in the public, that you're going to have NDP politicians and supporters, influencers blaming the private businesses that were involved, the private contractors involved, when it's public policy, which is incentivizing the misuse of funds. Because right now in the current rules, let's just go down to the ground level of road construction, road repairs. The government, when they pay people for, for like a provincial highway or a federal highway that the province is managing, or some municipality. Right now in BC, they will give you an allowance for overruns overruns that are acceptable. You never give a company and say, you know what, this job to do this many kilometers of the road, we're paying you guys $200,000 over the next 3 or 4 months. But you can go over time by about 3 or 4 extra months, and you can actually charge us up to $500,000. Who in their right mind is going to get the job done fast and efficient, even if you were bonused for getting it done fast and efficiently, when you can be lazy, get nothing done, and get paid more for it?
And there really has to be, and look, I'm not anti-union. That's something I want to make it really clear. I've been in a union. I've been a union organizer. I really respect the work that unions do. But I think the community benefits agreement that the NDP have put out there, which really, I think, have racked up costs at a time when costs are already flying up like crazy, has to be reviewed. I mean, at the end of the day, there is one taxpayer, and we have to respect taxpayer dollars. And look, I run a nonprofit here in Victoria. I'm also part of another international nonprofit that does work. And we have a line that I'm the director of development for the international one. And I have a line that I always use: donor dollars. We must respect our donor dollars. And that's my mindset, because that money is precious. We get it, and we have to respect it. But yet, because taxpayer money is somehow infinite, it doesn't need to be respected with and given the due consideration and care that it should. So I think on that piece, we do need to do a lot of work. And I don't know if you saw last week, the Metro Vancouver mayors that are making more than the president of the United States in some cases. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, who's like $400,000 for who was it? Was it Ian Brody?
Delta. It was Delta.
Yeah. And I was like, does Delta's mayor need $400,000?
Delta's barely a real municipality. all these places are just subsections of Vancouver. They can basically take whatever Vancouver's doing, although I wouldn't advise it, and just copy and paste it into their area.
Did you hear Mike Hurley, the mayor of Burnaby, actually say he deserved it? Like, yeah, I think I deserve it. I do a lot of work, and I'm up late, and I'm having a lot of meetings, and it's just like,
I'd hope that Brad West, who is also taking a lot to be the mayor of Port Coquitlam, that he'd maybe advocate for a slashing of his own salary, because I feel like if you want to be a new fiscal conservative kind of champion in the province, that should be looked at as like a, money where your mouth is, take a small sacrifice here. I'm not saying, slash your salary by 50%, but a lot of this stuff is like, well, no doubt this guy's doing a good job running the city. We're paying him a mountain.
Well, I like Brad, and I know
That's
people
what
who know Brad,
and that's what I'm saying for his brand.
say, but that's the thing. I mean, the brand, it doesn't look good. I mean, look, you can't say that you're a fiscal conservative and then suddenly have a whole bunch of money tied to you. It creates an optics problem. And so for anybody trying to be a fiscal conservative, just be watchful of how much taxpayer money you're spending, and if it's beyond what you think is reasonable, then slash it, donate it to something, do something else with it. I don't
actually
know.
I wouldn't even mind if they start a tradition with some of these mayors. Don't take a pay cut, but every year you donate 20%, 15% of your salary to an organization, or I'm donating 15% of my salary this year to refurbish park benches. Perfect.
Absolutely. Local food bank, because Lord knows that food banks usage has skyrocketed more than anything else I've seen here in a long time. There's a community up near where I live called Sydney by the Sea, or Sydney. Lots of people know it. You come through it when you take the ferry here. I understand that it has a high density of seniors that live up there. Food bank usage has increased over 100%. This is one of the wealthiest municipalities on the island, and yet food bank usage by seniors up there has increased tremendously, and that was shocking. I heard this a couple weeks ago.
And it's because it used to be an affordable place to live, probably. These people probably did well in their careers, but you banked a certain amount of money per year after you retired that you assumed that you needed to live on. And when you thought you were going to have to pay $15,000 a year, because you already own your home, you already have all this other stuff, you only have to pay $15,000 a year to sustain yourself, and your costs start going up to $23,000 a year that you have to pay, and your municipal property taxes keep going up. Eventually, doesn't work. But you mentioned the ferries just now, and I think that's something else we have to talk about, because this is yet another failure of the government that rolled out like right after the election, to the point where people couldn't get from Vancouver to Vancouver Island for Christmas.
Yeah. I mean, ferry stoppages.
This is World War II, and we're trying to get soldiers back to base camp so they can celebrate Christmas away from the front lines. We're just trying to get people in their SUVs from one location to another, and this
their SUVs or walk-ons, or if you're like me, for the first year and a half that I lived here, busing over because my wife went to Capilano University at the time. Look. The BC ferries are called the island's highway system, and I really do believe that they are an excellent innovation from Wacky Bennett, WAC Bennett, to bring in the ferry system that can connect the mainland and connect the island, and they have been largely, I think, successful, well managed. That's another issue. I mean, it is a crown corporation. Maybe it needs to be brought back under BC control. Maybe it needs to be made a completely private entity. I don't know. I'm not that much into kind of the mechanics of it, but I tell you what, ferries breaking down, 2 or 3 ferries breaking down every week or every 2 weeks, stranding people on either side of the ocean, is not what it was meant to be. It was meant to be something that could continuously run, and heaven forbid you need to actually get to the island and you're in Tawasin and a ferry breaks down and you have to jet to Horseshoe Bay just to hope you can get something or fly out. Like, it's really terrible that the ferries are having this much of a problem for a community that depends on them.
And this is exactly what happened, except it was centuries ago, so it's embarrassing now. But 2 centuries ago, in the 1820s, there was a problem with the ferry system between New Jersey and New York. And it was because the government had basically lent a monopoly to a company that did not require it did not require itself to do a good job in order to keep
Mhm.
getting its subsidies, and they even had a clauses that prevented competition from getting into the game with them. And it was actually Cornelius Vanderbilt who had to create an illegal ferry system that could get people across the water in half the time for like half the money, that eventually ended up running the state monopoly out of business. And right now, the problem in our modern day is that you could not just start up your own random ferry somewhere and get it going. You got to be connected to public roads. You got to be from a public port point. And if you start up your own, it's just not going to work. But we have to just accept that, oh, well, it's a public service, so we can't have it be like, a competition or whatever. It's like, well, it costs like half of a minimum wage worker's salary to cross the river if you needed to do that sort of thing. To get
Mhm.
a car across, it's like an entire day's wage and a half.
Yeah, well, you're not wrong, and they have. I mean, they are there have been some introductions of some small private sector stuff, like you've got Hello and Nanaimo, and that's just a walk on. They had the V2V ferry here in Victoria that lasted all of a year, because it was too expensive. It just couldn't. You can't make it work. So, and this kind of stuff always brings up conversations around a permanent road to the island. And again, I'm not an engineer. I don't know any feasibility of any of that stuff. But look, like whatever we need to do to keep the ferries running on time, to keep the trains running on time, people here on the island, and back and forth, because there are people here who go to Vancouver for cancer treatment, or go to Vancouver, or if you can't get cancer treatment in BC anymore, you go to the States. But you need access to this stuff. So breaking down is just not an option.
Yeah, and it's like honest. I've been a long time advocate, actually, even though I'm a fiscal conservative. They should just pool airport fees in general tax pools rather than having it be on ticket prices. Because
Mhm.
if you haven't checked recently, your ticket cost on an airline these days is like 1/3 of it is just government taxes and airport fees and all this other stuff. And airport fees that don't even make sense. Why do I need to pay $25 to the Vancouver airport every time I land for improvement fees? It has
I
nothing
was
to do
going to
with
say that
operations.
must be that improvement fee cost.
Security, even though security checks require fewer people and less time than ever, so somehow I
Mhm.
owe them $8 after I stand in line for a few minutes and walk through. To get your bags probably late, you had to pay another $7. You get nickel and dimed, and I'm always the person having to stand up for the honor of the airlines, because like it's really not their fault. It's not their fault that they suck. They have to suck to make money, because there's so many fees, there's extra fuel taxes they have to pay. They have to pay, they have to pay usage fees in order to get access to terminals and all this stuff, which makes sense. But it's also bloated. Obviously, you're going to have to add 3 or 4 more rows in the plane that probably shouldn't be there. Everyone could have way more leg room if it wasn't for government regulations and taxes. And so if you're going to give basically public corporations the monopoly over an airport, at least make it all publicly funded rather than user fees from people who, in theory, are bringing business to other parts of Canada.
You're totally right, and just on the point around fees and around taxes. I mean, we are paying so much these days, whether it's through carbon taxes or the myriad of other 30 some odd taxes that the NDP government introduced. And yet, in their most recent fiscal update in December, the NDP reported a $9.4 billion deficit, which is just, it's wild when you think just over 2 years before that date, the late John Horgan left David Eby with a $6 billion surplus.
Mhm.
So that means in 2 years, David Eby went from a $6 billion surplus to almost $10 billion in deficit. And now we're the ones who are going to have to probably deal with program cutbacks, housing program cuts, all other kinds of cuts that we already know. This rebate that we were supposed to be getting, a central economic pillar of Eby's 2024 election campaign, that's not coming, y'all. Like, I know, like, they're talking about shelving it, it might come. It's not coming. Like, it's
Yeah.
gone. It will not come, because they can't. It's just, if whether it's 10 or 15% that Trump brings into the tariffs, the NDP are going to lean on any excuse they can to try to save some money, because we're in serious trouble debt wise.
And that's also the thing I want to get to. David Eby is exploiting the issue of Trump to
Mm-hmm.
pretend that Well, it's not actually my fault BC's economically weak. It's the Trump tariffs that are only theoretical at this point that haven't even come in yet. That's why I suck at my job. Like the whole Team Canada thing feels like a psyop in terms of like a literal psychological operation to try and make Polyev and Danielle Smith and other conservative premiers like Scott Moe to join with these bloated other provincial governments and the federal government, and let's have a strong stance against Trump and the Americans. It's like, you guys actually need to be doing your jobs first. Maybe it would be good if this whole Team Canada, that half the team wasn't smoking and overweight. I mean, for a sports metaphor here, maybe if we're going to actually face them down, you guys need to cut your wasteful spending. You need to cut your overtaxation. It's crazy. And the funniest thing is Bill Vander Zalm, throughout all of this, was actually vindicated, because without his campaign to stop the HST, David Eby would be even more screwed than he already is, because he didn't have to forego the provincial sales tax between December and February.
So not only a shout out to Vander Zalm, but Bill Thielman, a longtime NDP insider and campaigner, who was also lead charge of the anti-HST campaign. I remember working on that campaign back in Vernon when Adrian Dix was still the leader, and Vernon ended up approving it by only about 51%. That was interesting. You're right, Wyatt, and it's interesting to look at all of this. Look at how much money the NDP has absolutely shoved down the toilet, and then look at how they gave every single MLA a cabinet level position or a minister of state position or a parliamentary secretary position, some kind of position that gave them a raise. And if you look at the order in councils that are coming out, and I check these every day when I'm at work, because I want to see where our money is going. And these order in council,
you should start sending me the funniest ones you find.
Oh man, some of the stuff that people are like, how many chiefs of staff does Ravi Kahlon have? Like, I think in all total, I think he's got like 8 or 9 staff, and they're making over $1 million, like in all of that staff.
He needs staff members to run around managing all of his building projects.
It's true. You have Matt Smith, who was David Eby's chief of staff, who only worked for 2 years and got a $270,000 severance when he left. That's just his severance. I think in total, he got like $800,000 for 2 years.
Yeah, because your severance was half the salary over a certain period of time. So his salary was double that, $500,000 a year to make trouble, basically. And the funny thing is, he has a bigger cabinet because everyone got a cabinet. He's the Oprah Winfrey.
It's the Oprah Winfrey. You get a raise. You get a raise. Everybody gets a raise.
Every useless random MLA, anyone who could fog a mirror in the party, got a new higher position. Some of the lowest end promotions only get them like a parliamentary secretary bump of 12,000, but some of the other cabinet minister positions are getting them 84,000 more a year or 100,000 for certain positions. The cabinet literally costs $400,000 more than Horgan's cabinet cost, even though he had a far bigger caucus, where you could have argued that, this guy's he has a PhD in, mathematics. I really want him to be in this position, even though I already have a finance minister. No, he has less talent, because a lot of the talent left before the election. A lot of these people are just put up in these roles. So with the B squad for some reason justified even more positions, and the $400,000 cabinet price increase, that's only the MLA extra cost. That has nothing to do with what you're saying. Yeah, everyone has a bunch of new staffers they get to employ, because you're not just the parliamentary secretary. You're now an important person who now needs 3 other interns, and you need
you need a chief of staff, you need an EA, or maybe you need 2 EAs, and maybe you need a co-chief of staff, and maybe you need a director of communications, maybe you need several administrative assistants.
I need an extra
maybe you need a special advisor. Yeah, I mean, there are special advisors listed in some of these roles, which I'm just like, what are you special advising on? And why do these cabinet ministers need special advisors when they have government bureaucracies that are set up and designed to give them the best information possible? Like, I've worked in the bureaucracy here in BC for a few years. I know how expert some of these bureaucrats really are. These are people who spend a lot of time looking and thinking about problems and trying to fix them. And
took a master's degree in
to
public
not lean
policy.
on them is ridiculous.
I took a master's degree in public policy, so I know that even some of these people in these very technical policy jobs are actually genuinely worth it. They actually genuinely know how to take your big piece of legislation, break it down into its component parts, and knows how to hand each part off to its right department so they can make the changes they need.
Yep.
There are some good people in there, but it feels like with so many people in government, it's like watching that rich kid who never had his parents really teach him the value of money going out and being given $1 million, and you wonder how they end up blowing it all in like 2 years because they go on vacation and they spend like $45,000 on a vacation. And that's what the NDP feels like. It's like watching people who have never learned the value of money. The thing that always drove me up the wall as something you think the government would, even if they don't want to admit that there's problems, you think they would silently do this in the background because it's such an easy solution to reduce wait times and ER closures in BC healthcare. 40% of people who are in HR and administration and management in the healthcare system, some of them should be in those positions, but 40% of them are registered nurses and doctors. So when I talk about eliminating some of these positions, we're not eliminating the position, we are moving them back to front lines. And the problem is everything is just perverse incentives in the BC government and in the different institutions. You make more from stopping being a nurse, which doesn't pay that well in your first few years, so you're probably already pretty resentful. But if you get in good with the union, and it's not that unions are bad, it's just that unions have now been taken over by politicians themselves. The people who run them are very much lefty politicians, because I heard in the 90s there was almost a riot with the nurses union when they heard 15% of the healthcare budget was going to administration. These days it's like 50-50 front lines at administration. But the thing is, like, the thing is that's why there's so much bloat. It's because people who are disgruntled and who have the right connections can move from being only paid $70,000 a year, $65,000 a year as a nurse, and bump up to an HR rep for the region, and you're now making $130,000, even though you have actually increased the workload on everyone else at the front lines. It is a vicious cycle.
It is, and look, I've seen it happen within unions in my time in union environments. I've seen folks who I honestly didn't think were that exceptional at their job somehow managed to get involved in union executive roles, and now they are, because they were a union member, they were allowed to be, or they got to be elected into an executive position, and now somehow they're running the union for something that they weren't actually all that good at before. So it really is just a cozy place to land where, in my opinion, you're not really doing that much work, but you're getting to siphon off of union, you're getting to live off of union dues and not really get much done for it, in my opinion.
These people in many cases make more than these mayors we just talked about. They're making like executive salaries for being like professional useless people, because a union fundamentally should be an advocacy group for good workers, that these people deserve better. But really it's that certain members deserve cushy administrative jobs. And I've heard this happens in Alberta all the time, is that people who are really cozy with the Alberta Teachers Union, they will work as a teacher for maybe a semester, maybe a year. And then they'll get bumped up to co-principal at a school, because the schools have a lot of people who want to stay friendly with the Alberta Teachers Union. And the way that you stay friendly is that you give the people that they kind of indicate should be put in a manager role into a manager role. And within a couple of decades, even the Calgary Board of Education is full of union people, because they have saying, okay, we'll take on your people to stay friendly, but then it's union people then promoting good union people into union jobs. The whole thing, it's like unions all the way down.
Well, and you know, you've segued into another issue that I know really well, which is education. And here in Victoria, we have an issue where we have the local school board for the last 18-19 months has been running in direct opposition to its community, to every locally elected municipality, to the two Indigenous nations that are here, to multi-faith organizations, you name it, parents groups, advocacy organizations, all of them. And essentially what they did is they kicked school police liaison officers out of their classrooms 18 months ago, out of their schools, pardon me, and said, we don't want them in our schools anymore, for really no reason. So what happened was the the at the time the Human Rights Commissioner for BC, Kasari Govinder, essentially said we don't have enough information to prove that these school police liaison officers are actually a benefit. And so what we did, because I was on the board at the time, I said, okay, well, let's review and see what the community thinks, and let's see what students think, and are they serving a purpose? Are there things we can do to improve? Because I am someone who believes no policy is outside of review. Everything should be reviewed, all of it, right? And so we reviewed it. We got a feedback from the community after about a year and a half or so of talking about this. By and large, everybody wanted the program to stay. Some folks wanted some tweaks, but like a 70%, 75% majority surveyed wanted it to stay. Well,
and I assume that the
I didn't
other
run
margin
again,
was.
but
sorry, I was just going to say, I assume that the other 30% wasn't
I've
even
lost,
people who were.
I've lost sound with you for some reason. That's weird.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Can you try again?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, that's weird. It's out of my monitor. Hold on one sec.
No worries. I'll let Ryan fix that. But the thing I was going to ask, and which Ryan can respond to in a second, is that even when you see something where it's like 70% of people agree, and this happens in polling all the time, that doesn't mean the 30% disagree. So I assume you had a lot of, well, I'm neutral to it as well.
We had neutral neutral folks there. We had folks that were just like, yeah, we can see where there are problems, but it should be changed, it should be fixed, which was fine. I didn't run again, but in I guess 6 or 7 months after we got those survey results, the school board just said, okay, they're gone. They just brought a motion to get rid of them. There was no discussion, there was no anything. They just got rid of them. And so the community, of course, has been up in arms about this. We had petitions, we've had protests, and just last week we had all of the police departments in the community, Victoria, Oak Bay, the West Shore RCMP, Saanich Police Department, all chiefs of police wrote to the minister saying they had no confidence in this school board, that they couldn't work with them effectively. And so the minister essentially demanded that this board write some safety plans to put this back in place, or to do something to work with the community. We've had the nations also say, because there's a Esquimalt and Songhees nations here too, they've also said this school board is not engaging with us respectfully. And I really think that this board should have been fired quite a long time ago. And under Section 172 of the School Act, the minister can appoint an official trustee, that's the word for it, who can take up the roles of a trustee. And under, I think it's subsection C and D, I think there's specific mentions around safety. So I honestly think this board is rogue. They've given an opportunity to try to fix things. They don't want to. This is a headache for David Eby, because down here in Victoria, it is NDP territory, and it has always been NDP territory, and people here always vote NDP. But stuff like this starts to happen where the government isn't super responsive. Things are getting more dangerous. You don't mess with people's kids. You just don't do it.
It feels like in LA.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, it strikes me as something along the lines of like Karen Bass in Los Angeles cutting the fire department budget because she wants it freed up for other stuff. Because the government's so bloated, obviously, it's hard to even raise spending at this point. So maybe you get some anti-police progressives on the board who have already an excuse to not want these police resource officers in schools, and it gives them an extra few $1 million to play with if they eliminate it.
Well, the funny thing is, there's no money. The school board doesn't pay for this. The money comes from there's no, like, the school board has never paid for this program. The program is paid for entirely by local police. And so this has never been something that the school board ever had to pay for. They don't save money by getting rid of this, right? And so it is purely ideological. It is a 100, and what they'll say is, well, some Black and Indigenous kids feel unsafe with police in schools. How racist is that?
I hate that mentality. I'm like, you might as well start referring to people as slurs if you're going to start basically saying, oh, these people can't have police around. What? That's disgusting to say.
It is. It's totally disgusting. And we actually have we had local members of the Black community and the Indigenous community say, we want police involved. Like, maybe we change how they're involved or something, but we want them involved. And so they're completely ignoring them because they're not the right Indigenous and Black voices for them. The voices that they want are the voices that line up with their ideology.
And that's actually what happens all of the time in the US. It's usually white progressives telling you that Black people don't want police resource officers in their communities or more police doing patrols in their communities. And when they poll those communities, they're literally the most pro-police communities is the Black community in America. They're the most pro-police.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess to kind of round all of these pieces up, David Eby's second term has not started well. It's gone about as well as his first, if not worse than his first. And where are we going this year? Well, the budget is going to come down at the end of February, when actually the beginning of March, when the legislature comes back in on the 18th. I imagine we're going to get cuts.
By the way, something we haven't talked about yet. When is the legislature actually sitting this year? How many days?
I think it's 69 days, 67 days, something like that.
Yeah, and here's the thing I think was most disgusting about that. It's not because you could say like, oh, well, it's good government's not meeting as much. They can't screw as much up. Sure, but the problem is, as you would know, when you're in opposition as the BC Conservative Party right now, you get fewer opposition days to put forward petitions and do your own bills and do your own your own work in the legislature.
Everything is truncated. Yeah,
and everything is truncated, and I think it's because David Eby does not like hearing from other people, not people from his own party, not people from the other party. David only listens to David. And so I think that there is a real risk right now, and this is just from my perspective. I haven't talked to anyone, that he might have an NDP MLA cross the floor at some point, whether that's to the Greens or the Conservatives, or just saying, I'm an independent now, leave me alone, because he talks down to people so much. And it seems like he feels like he can just muscle his way through this entire situation right now. All the bad economic news, the Surrey Guildford riding lawsuit, he can just kind of push through and he will eventually win because I'm the leader.
Things are not looking good for him on that, and I'm glad you brought up. So yes, legislature's only in for 67, 69 days, something like that. It's ridiculous because you're right.
67.
Yeah, 67. You're right. It does not allow the opposition an opportunity to do its job. It's you want to call it a royal prerogative or a democratic prerogative, whatever it is. It doesn't get to do the job of opposing, proposing, and doing its work and scrutinizing. And Eby hates that. That's why in the last session of his government, the last term of his government, he dropped so many bills late and really clipped the time that they could be debated, forced closure on quite a few things, didn't allow any time for stuff, just ran things through. He's probably going to do that again because he has even more weak people elected to now try to argue and push this stuff through. That's why we've been on a break for 4 months since the election. But I just want to hit on something you said around discontent in the party, because I was an NDPer for 20 some odd years, and I haven't been in the party now since January 2023. But people in the party still talk to me, and there are unhappy people in the party, very unhappy. And I know that there are folks who feel that he is the one who barely won this election. And I think he has quite a bit to contend with inside the party. I would not be surprised if there were some really unhappy people who didn't get cabinet promotions, like higher level ministerial positions, who should have, who stayed loyal, who stayed behind. And you just have to look at the ridings, and there were a few of them where you had an NDPer win only because there was a former BC United candidate or there was an independent candidate who pulled votes away from the BC Conservative. Otherwise, the BC Conservative would have won. Look at those ridings, and those are places where I think you have some real potential for dis-ease and upset and unhappiness within the NDP caucus. Now, nobody there that I've talked to has told me anything, but I know other people who talk to me about stuff, and there's quite a bit of dissatisfaction in that party right now.
Yeah, maybe this is a final point, and then you can talk a bit about your Substack. But the place I always kind of circle in on is Surrey, because there's so many of these Surrey BC NDP MLAs, especially guys who are more community figures and less NDP ideologues, who look at the education minister absolutely getting skunked in the election. And it was specifically because she was the NDP education minister and could not run away from SOGI 123. Yep. I know a lot of these guys in Surrey were running around saying, well, of course I get a free vote on SOGI. Of course I'm against it. They know next election, whenever that comes, they're going to be against potentially the same opponent with more name recognition, more money, and more disdain for their position on the issues. if the
Yep.
BC Conservatives push forward, I would say a dozen votes on everything to do with Soji around it, you're going to have a lot of these guys find ways of taking an off ramp and joining the BC Conservatives, because it's hard to run for re-election when people know you're a fraud on an issue that fundamental to the more socially conservative community in Surrey.
Yeah, or they just get challenged for a nomination. You know, we don't call it primaried up here. That's what it is in the States. But essentially, that could happen too. I mean, you're not guaranteed a nomination in the NDP. I know internally I've seen folks thinking that they were a shoo-in, and suddenly their nomination doesn't get approved. And we, in fact, saw that when we saw that with the Nathan Cullen fiasco that happened back in 2020. Right? There's that certainly happens, and it can happen here.
Yeah. So what's your website and Substack all about?
So politicalpulse.ca is my Substack. Essentially, it is a broad cross-section discussion around politics, the federal, the provincial. We talk about culture, society. I just had a really good in-depth conversation with Chris Sankey, who was the North Coast Haida Gwaii candidate, proud Indigenous, former Indigenous elected official from the Tsimshian Nation, also a resource, a very proud resource champion, natural resource champion. And Chris had he had a tough go of it in the last election. He had some lies told about him by the premier, which made things very, very difficult and challenging for him. Death threats included as a result of that. And so Chris and I got really deep on that. I was his campaign manager, and so there were things that we kind of both got to talk about. I had it behind a paywall, but I actually had quite a few people say, we want to see this whole video with you and Chris. So I unpaywalled it. So now people can just go and watch the whole video. I had a discussion with former federal minister of health Ujjal Dosanjh, also former premier of BC. We talked about what Ujjal says is Canada descending into a nation of street fights, and it was a really fascinating conversation. He doesn't pull his punches when he tells you what he thinks about Justin Trudeau.
I really like Ujjal Dosanjh. That's a good one to check out. So I'll be linking, because this won't be released right away. So everyone, I will be linking the Chris Sankey interview in the description below, so you can go check that out. It's going to be pinned at the top of the comments, as well as Ryan's overall Substack as well, if you want to go over and subscribe. But definitely I'm going to have you back on, because it sounds like you know the policy better than I do. I'm never going to be the person saying the Elections Act, subsection, whatever here. I'm a policy guy who hates reading policy.
You know what? I don't know it all, Wyatt, but I tell you, there's some stuff that I can go really deep into because I'm a bit of a nerd with certain things. Don't ask me about health stuff, because I could go high level on health stuff, but on education, on things like mining, natural resources, I'm all over it.
Yeah, I was going to say one more thing. Shout out to Chris Sankey, because I was just looking at the 2020 election results to the 2024 election results, and despite there being no third-party candidate, Chris Sankey went from, because the BC Liberals, their candidate last time, Roy Jones Jr., got 22% of the vote, who was the more technically conservative option compared to the NDP. And he ended up getting, Chris Sankey got 35%, so that's a 12% increase. Very, very respectable in a riding like North Coast Haida Gwaii that is never expected to even have a large conservative population. And now you're actually probably in punching distance for whenever the next election breaks out.
We're very proud of that outcome. We poured everything into that race, man, and we didn't have a huge team, but we had a lot of heart, and we're proud of that. And there's a lot that we both learned coming out of that campaign.
Yeah, no, I always like people who are good at campaigning actually try hard on the ground, because so many people in the campaigning world think it's that your social media ads and your brand that are going to pull you through. It's like that's a quarter of the campaign. A quarter is your local ads, a quarter is your door knocking, and a quarter is the candidate actually themselves going out there and talking to people. So many people think you can win with 1 to 3 of the quarters. You need all 4.
You need all 4. Yeah, you need all 4.
Anyways, well, thanks for coming on the show, Ryan, and definitely we'll be seeing you in the coming months as things in BC continue to be insane. Have a great one.